Have you ever had a question that nobody could seem to answer? Like, for example, why is it called hamburger when it's not made out of ham? or why is this critter called a guinea pig when it's a rodent and clearly not a pig? Or why is it called a hot dog when they're not made out of dogs? Or why is it called a pair of pants if there's only one? There's only one. Why is it called a butterfly if they have nothing to do with butter or flies? You see what I mean? Like sometimes we see things in the world around us that make us pause and wonder why things are the way they are. We wonder why those things happen and who decided they should be that way. On a scale of 1 to 10, how frustrated are you when you don't get the answer to a question you've asked? Now, I know the names of hamburgers and guinea pigs and hot dogs aren't life's biggest questions. Totally get that. But also, there's so much happening in the world that can cause us to ask even bigger questions than that, especially when the things we see don't seem right. That's why we're in the middle of this series called Do Something. And in it, we're talking about how we can see and respond to that kind of stuff. What we can do about the injustice happening all around us. You see, if you remember, injustice is the opposite of justice. You see, justice is justice is right, like it has to do with things that are right, things that are fair, things that are equal. So injustice are the things in our life and in our world that aren't fair, aren't equal, and aren't right. And it's something I think we can all agree we want to do something about, right? But while the feeling of wanting to help is a really good thing, I think it's important to remember this. Seeing injustice may make you feel something that you aren't exactly sure what to do about. Maybe you know what I mean. Like maybe you've seen photos of animals kept in cages or poorly treated, and you're wondering, why would someone do something like that? Or you've seen videos on the internet of people being hurt or mistreated because of the color of their skin. And you ask, why would somebody treat another person like that? Maybe you've heard someone make fun of another person because of the neighborhood they live in, and you stopped and you thought to yourself, well, they can't control that. Like why would it be okay for somebody to make fun of another person, like when they have no control over that? You see, no matter what the injustice is, I think that the more we begin to see what is happening around us, the more opportunity we have to ask questions about what it is that we're seeing. Maybe you've started asking questions like, why is this even happening? Or you started asking questions like why would somebody do that? Or what is wrong with them? Why don't they just leave it alone? Like, don't just stop. To be honest, I've asked questions like that too. But when it comes to injustice, my questions always seem to come back to one huge question. The hardest question for me to understand or find an answer to. It's, if God is so great and loving and powerful, why isn't He doing something about this? Can you relate? Like maybe you feel nervous that I even just said that. I mean, we're in church. We're not supposed to be questioning God here, right? After all, He's God. Even if we don't understand what He's doing, we just have to accept it, right? Or maybe you're like, yeah, that's what I keep asking. Like you've never said it out loud, but you've wondered the same thing in your mind. How can things like racism and poverty and hunger and animal abuse and crime and discrimination exist in a world that God has power over? If He can do anything He wants, why wouldn't He just do something about all the wrong that we see in the world? You see, maybe you're new to this whole faith stuff, so you're not really sure what you think about this question yet. But you do know that there are injustices happening around you in the world, in your community, in your school, maybe even in your own life or in your own family. If that's you, I'm sorry that you're experiencing this. It matters a lot, and we're going to keep talking about it. But today, I'd say that for some of you, it may be the reason that you aren't so sure about God. Like after all, He seems silent, or like He isn't there as these injustices are happening all around the world and even in your own life. No matter how this question makes you feel, here's one thing I want you to be sure of. It's okay to ask questions. It truly is. In fact, God can handle your hard questions. He's not afraid of them. And honestly, I think he wants you to get it out. He wants you to ask. Because asking questions is part of what helps us to discover more about who God really is. It's what helps us get to the truth. Why do you think it's important to ask questions when we see injustice? And trust me, we're not the only ones to be asking big questions about God and injustice. Believers, thinkers, writers, experts, scholars, they've all been trying to answer these questions for a long time. A long time. And the truth is, there are just no easy answers to any of this. Because once we've seen injustice, we know somebody needs to do something. But why does it sometimes feel like God is doing nothing? Maybe you've assumed God doesn't care. Maybe you've assumed certain people just have things easier than others. And maybe you think that because somehow God let it happen that way. Maybe some people just have a harder time in life. And God says, oh well, good luck out there. Not much I can do about it. Thankfully, we don't have to guess or assume where God stands on all of this. We don't have to wonder how he feels about injustice. We don't have to guess at what God is really like. We can look at his son Jesus, who is the best way to see what God is really like. Several people who knew Jesus personally and hung out with him took the time to write down what they saw and what they heard, so that people like you and me, the ones who didn't get to see it with their own eyes, would know what happened. So today we're going to take a look at the eyewitness account of Matthew, a book written by one of Jesus' closest friends, one of his followers. And sometimes in church we call this the book of Matthew, sometimes we call it the Gospel of Matthew, and no matter what it is that you call it, Matthew hung out with Jesus and knew what Jesus was all about. And maybe that's why he took the time to write it down. He wrote down, the things he saw, so that way we could know what Jesus was like. So in this story, here's what Matthew says. Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. So during his ministry here on earth, Jesus spent a lot of time traveling around to tell people about God. And in doing that, Jesus talked a lot, he talked about a lot of different things that God cared about. Things like people being rescued from captivity, the hungry being fed, the poor being served, and the children being cared for. In other words, Jesus was talking about injustice. But Jesus didn't stop there. He didn't. He also did a lot of different things to help those who were in need around him. So he healed and he helped people who were sick and suffering all the time. It's almost like everywhere he went, Jesus had something to say and something to do about injustice. The scripture continues, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. This is so important. Jesus didn't just see the people around him and move on. He did things to help them. But he didn't just act to help them because he had to. He helped them because he cared. He had compassion for the people around him, and that compassion motivated him to act, to help, to do something. And that's what he wants us to do as well. He wants us to respond and act not just because we should, but because we care. See, Jesus showed us that what God is like when it comes to injustice. He gave us a model to follow. First, Jesus saw the injustice. What's cool is that he didn't just see it, he looked for it wherever he went, and he helped others to see it as well. And when he saw injustice, he cared. So if you've ever wondered, God is pro-justice. In fact, hundreds of years earlier, God said through the prophet Isaiah, "For I, the Lord, love justice." So we know that God loves justice. We know that He cares. We know that He sees it. But that still doesn't totally answer our question, does it? I mean, if He cares so much, why isn't He stopping it all? Why doesn't God just do that whole miracle thing that we know God can do? Why doesn't He just fix it really quick? Well, I think our answer is actually in the last part of this verse. The last part of the verse we just read in Matthew. So look at what Jesus said one more time, okay? When He saw the crowds, He had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He said to His disciples, "The harvest is great, but the workers are few." So maybe you don't talk like that often, right? Like our day-to-day lives, we're not talking about harvesting and reaping and all of that. But they lived in a very, like a farming community, which we can relate. Kingsburg is definitely a farming community. A lot of you have family and friends who are farmers. So he's using this image of farming to talk about the work that needed to be done. When He said that the harvest is great, He meant that the work to be done to make the world more like God intended is big. There's a lot of work to do. And the people to do that work, well, there's only a few of them. The work to help those who are hurting and struggling and facing injustice is big. But here, Jesus reminds us that there is a plan to see that work done. And it's in the workers. The people like you and me. What if we are the plan? What if we're actually the answer to all the questions we have about what God is doing to fight injustice in our world? What if it was you and me working on behalf of Jesus to take care of the things that He cares about? When it comes to what God is doing about injustice, I think the answer is us. God is opening our eyes to see it. He's giving us the compassion to care about it, and He's calling us to act in response to it. He's working through us to see wrongs being made right in the world. And I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty cool. In other words, God is doing something about injustice. And what is He doing? Opening our eyes to see it, changing our hearts to care about it, and using us, His followers, to do something about it. The good news is God is still doing something about injustice, even thousands of years after the events we read in the Bible. You see, movements that have helped animal rights, women's rights, voting rights are just a few results of God's followers all around the world opening their eyes to injustice and choosing to help others. What's one way God shows that He cares about injustice? Share an example of how you've seen God use someone to show He cares about injustice. So where do we begin? If we want to be a part of the solution to injustice in the world, where do we begin? How do we change the way we see what God is doing so that we can do something with Him? I think we can do two main things, okay? One, we can start by asking God to help us change our minds. Maybe you need God to help you change your mind about who He is. For so long, you've thought that He doesn't care about injustice. You believe that He was silent or only blesses certain people while others suffer. And for you, a great first step would be to ask God to help you change the way you see Him. Ask God to show you that He not only sees injustice, but He cares a lot about it, and especially the people who are hurt by it. Ask Him to show you where He's at work when it comes to injustice and how you can be a part of what it is that He is doing. And the truth is, when we ask God to show us how we can be a part of what He's doing about injustice, He'll show you something in the world that just might move you to action. By figuring out what injustice in the world breaks your heart, you'll move one step closer to being part of God's plan to do something about injustice. Or maybe for you, you need God to help change your mind about what it means to follow Him. You thought faith was about singing songs. You thought it was about just showing up to church on Sunday mornings and maybe just making sure you say a prayer at night before you go to bed. And look, those are all good things. They are. But part of following Jesus means caring about what He cares about. A good first step would be to ask God to help you see more of what it looks like to follow Him, to help you start caring about what He cares about. Maybe you need His help to change your mind about other people. You need Him to help change the way you see other people. Because if you're honest, sometimes you struggle to care about the injustices that are happening around you. You struggle to have compassion for others who are different than you. You see, a great first step would be to ask God to help change the way you see others, to help you see them with compassion and heart. So step 2. After doing step 1, I think we need to start asking different questions. Instead of asking, where is God? We can ask things like, what does God think about this person or this situation? What are God's people doing to right this wrong? Who do I listen to in order to learn more about this injustice? And what is God calling me to do to help? Or how can God use me to help? You see, God is doing something about injustice, and questions like these will help us join in that work with Him. It will help us be part of the answer. How does it feel to know God invites us to be part of fighting injustice? So let me close by asking you this. What injustice in the world do you care about? Which one moves you to want to act? What do you see in the world around you that makes you want to do something to make it right? Is it racism? Is it untreated illness? Unequal treatment of women? Animal cruelty? Is it the student at school who's bullied? Is it the homeless population? Maybe not here in Kingsburg, but in Fresno? Is it the junior hires whose families can't afford presents during Christmas time? Whatever it is, I want to encourage you to share it with your community group. You see, like I say every week, these groups exist to be a safe space for you to be able to open up to talk about what it is that's happening in your life, what it is that you're experiencing, and be able to encourage each other to grow in your faith. So today, talk about the injustices that you see. Share what you care about, and then encourage each other to see that God cares for that too. He created you to be part of the answer, part of the solution. What if the Christians at your school or in your neighborhood were the most compassionate, were the most kind, were the most brave, and the most vocal about injustice? What would happen at your school, in your group, or in our town? Well, I don't know for sure, but I have to imagine that the people you know would be more willing to believe that God is doing something when it comes to injustice because they see you doing something. How can each of us be part of working against the injustice we've been learning about? Thank you all for hanging out. I hope you've been having some good discussions in your community groups. Before you go, just don't forget to share the praises, like share the good things that God is doing in your life. And then I want to encourage you to pray for one another. What are your prayer requests? Like, nobody's life is perfect. You're welcome to be fully transparent in your group and know that what is said in your group stays in your group. Look, no one's families are perfect. If things are going on in your family, you need prayer, let's pray for them. You don't have to be super specific, but you can say, hey, I'm having family problems, I need prayer. That's great, we can pray for that. Or hey, you know what, I'm really struggling with depression, I could use prayer. Or I'm really struggling with believing in myself. Like, we can pray for that, and God can do incredible things. So I just want to encourage you, whatever is on your heart, whatever's on your spirit, in your mind, share that, and definitely pray for one another, okay? Lastly, I say it every week, be praying for your oikos. Be following those steps. Invite them to your community group, and just be praying for them, okay? So thanks for hanging out. We'll see you again next week.